Every once in a while, I get glimmers glimmers of hope, and things that make me hopeful are things like, agree with Malone and McCullough or not. The fact that 40 million, 50 million people watched them, and only 5 million people are tuning into MSNBC or whatever it is, that kind of gives me hope that, there's a lot of people out there who want to hear something alternative. They see that society is corrupt and our mainstream institutions are corrupt. They don't believe the media narrative anymore. They don't believe what the government says anymore, and they're going to start to think for themselves. And the conclusions that they come to after thinking for themselves are not as important to me as the fact that they're thinking for themselves. I think just that fact that they are is a really, really, really hopeful sign.
Do you foresee for yourself in all of this? Because let's be honest, you've invested a lot more in your career than I did, and I fought and it ended, but it wasn't a complete loss for me in the sense of they realized that their heads were on the chopping block and they wanted me to go away, and they were willing to start making some concessions towards that. In your case, it's kind of like you stand to lose a career at the drop of a hat on the whim of a bureaucrat. And I'm not asking you to bare your soul in that regard, but do you foresee that because of who you are as a person, that it could be a very quick end for you, so to speak, career wise?
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's inevitable?
No, I don't think it's inevitable. Quite possible. Here's the way I feel about it. I have these times when I first get hit with these things. So when I had my first complaint about going back to the article I wrote about personal responsibility and the guy who died in jail and all that, when I came home, I had been away for a couple of weeks. I came home, I found this complaint in my mailbox. I walk into my house and there's a 35-page legalese complaint signed by 14 left-wing activists. And I got to say, it floored me. For a few days, I was kind of like, oh my God, the hospital's trying to get a hold of me, but it's not non-urgent. I have different ringtones, so I know it's not urgent.
You know when you're really needed.
Yeah, they have a 911 tone for me. So if it was that, I just go. But yeah, anyway, it really hit me hard for a few days, but then I back up. And one of the things I'll say about myself, I don't take myself too seriously. I'm not like the best doctor in North America, and I'm going to be a huge loss to the profession. I'm definitely not the worst doctor. I consider myself happily a decent doc. I really like my job. I love my patients. I would miss the profession. If you asked me 10 years ago, I planned to be one of those old doctors working, and they'd have to pry the stethoscope from my cold, dead hands when they found me dead.
You'll still be out there giving people shots with the old steel syringes.
Yeah, that's right. I like my job and whatnot. And if it works out, I'll probably keep working and working. Might work a little less sometimes. So that's my plan. If I certainly won't stop saying what I think. So if saying what I think and feel becomes incompatible with still working, I'll choose saying what I think and feel. I have the advantage of being fairly, my wife and I don't have kids, and we're both docs, so we're financially well off. And I'm not gonna starve to death. I'm not gonna lose my house or anything. So part of the reason, I guess, maybe I don't know, but I think I would speak out even if I was not in that position, because I'm just that kind of stubborn guy. But it makes it even easier decision for me to say, yes, I make a lot of money. Docs in Canada are really well paid, and I would lose all that, but I don't really care that much. It's not important. I'd rather have my soul and my freedom, what I want to say, and a lot less money. That's fine for me. So in the end, when I was threatened to shut up again, my response was to start the Substack that you have below there. Whenever they've try to shut me up, I just double down. My wife and I just bought the domain freespeechandmedicine.com, and we should have a website up by next week. And we plan to have lots of, I'll get some bare bones up, and then we're going to add to it. We're going to have a conference this fall that we're already working on, Free Speech and Medicine Conference, which we hope will be a first annual. So that's my response when people try to shut me up. It's like, oh, you're going to try to shut me up now? And we're really
I have no idea what that's like.
Yeah.
To just keep going. That was one of the critiques that I got, was when they did the internal investigation on me. In the investigatory report, the attorney included in the investigatory report that was then like condensed into a 45-page document. And one of the things was, and Deputy Pearson continued to insist that he had an unfettered right to speak his mind and freedom of speech, even through all of this. And I'm like, the heck you say? Who would do that?
Oh my God.
I know how you feel about that kind of that shock of that initial, here's this formal complaint, because I'm going to share this here if I can figure out how to do it. I'm not as tech savvy as I'd like to be sometimes. I had that same experience. Well, it's right at a year ago, just a little over a year ago. I don't know if you can see that, but that's what I walked into. And the meeting on February 19th of 2021 was what you're seeing right there, was that exact same thing. I kind of had, something's going to come eventually, but that's what I walked into in that moment, was that particular letter that you see right there. And, at the end of it, it said, and any further infractions could result in or include even further sanctions or something like that, up to and including termination of employment. And that's a blow to anybody in a career field, anybody. So I know, and I can empathize or sympathize, however you want to say it, with what you're saying in that moment. Like it's like, ugh. But you have an option in that moment, right, Chris? You have an option to either respond to that in a positive way and say, okay, you guys have played your cards, and here's how I'm going to respond, and I'm not going to give you the response that you want. I might calculate a little bit, I might reformulate my strategy some, but I'm going to come back out swinging in one way or another. Or you could just say, okay, you win, I'm afraid, and back down. In our brief conversation leading up to this, our interchange with the email, and even talking about your experience here recently with a reporter, and seeing, when you first reached out to me, it was about you reaching out to me because of what you saw on Unsafe, and me being intrigued with your Paradox site for Substack. I learned very quickly that you are not the guy who gets faced with trouble and says, ooh, I better stop. And
that's why I was really attracted to your story. Like, I listened to a lot of podcasts, including Unsafe Space, and I've heard lots of different people. But when I heard your story, it's like, oh, I think we're living a parallel life, different profession, but a parallel life. And I kind of like this guy. His response to "you better shut up" was, "Yeah, right."
Yeah, I like it exactly. And that's why when I saw your stuff, I was like, oh, I like this guy. Don't even know him yet, but I like him. And there needs to be more awareness. That's why I asked you to come on, especially when you told me about the kind of getting ambushed here this last week. Like, my tactic was when I had a newspaper reporter reach out to me and wanted to ask me about something that didn't happen, like literally accuse me of something that literally did not happen. My response was yeah, I'll talk to you. And then I immediately went and did a YouTube video detailing the entire conversation, talking about, here's your opportunity, Mr. First, Mr. Newspaper Reporter, to be a man of integrity and ethics. You better tell the whole story, because I just told it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit back and wait. No, I'm not doing that. I've already done the damage to myself, if you will. I might as well keep fighting, because what good is it? And we talked about this before we started recording a little bit. What good does it do an individual to say they have an ethos or a principle or a conviction, to say you have it, but then never speak it or stand on it.
Mm-hmm.
You really don't have a conviction or an ethos.
I agree. And so I've always been probably a little too open with the media, and I still see the goodness in humans. I deal with so many good people and run my work, patients and coworkers. So I tend to be generous of spirit, and my wife is probably more of a realist in that way. So I'll tell, for the benefit of the people who might be listening, I'll just tell the story of the recent ambush. So you guys may know that the story of the trucker convoy. The trucker convoy was really, there were a lot of supporters. They raised over $10 million on GoFundMe within the first few days, which is way more money than any political party in Canada. We're a small country compared to you guys. And so there was a lot of people supporting them. And then GoFundMe, as you may know, got told by the government to shut them down. So they basically tried to steal the money, and that went away. And then they went to Give, Send, Go. And a number of us who had supported them through GoFundMe, we gave to Give, Send, Go. And then there was a data breach. And so it was kind of like, what would you call it? It was like the Pentagon Papers or something. It was like, oh, who in Canada is supporting these vile truckers, all the white supremacists? And so this reporter had heard that we were on the list and got in touch with both my wife and I, sent a Facebook message. And I said to my wife, are you going to talk to her? And she said, oh, no, I'm not going to talk to her. They're looking to do a hit piece. And this reporter, I kind of know her through her husband. And I said, well, she's probably a reasonable person, blah, 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 blah. And I reached out to her and said, look, I'm willing to talk to you, but do you really think you have the bandwidth, the space in a short newspaper article to do a good story on the trucker convoy? It's intensely complicated. It involves, personal liberty versus authoritarianism and government overreach and all these things. And can you really write a newspaper article that takes that all into account? She said, oh, yeah, I really want to do a good article on the trucker convoy to tell both sides of the story and to get it out there and discuss it and get people discussing it. And the way she put it is like, oh, okay, well, that sounds pretty reasonable. So I talked to her for an hour. We talked about the founding of America and the American Constitution and Canadian founding compared to that, and government overreach and Nazi Germany and the parallels. And we had this broad-ranging conversation, and I could tell that she had her own opinion. She mentioned about, she kept asking questions like, well, aren't you worried because there are white supremacists amongst the truckers? I was like, there are no white supremacists amongst the truckers. I've never heard of one. I have lots of friends who were up there. Anyway, so it kind of went like that. We talked for an hour. Later that day, I got a message from my brother saying, hey, I heard they did a hit piece on you. I was like, excuse me? And I didn't know her deadline was like 2 hours after we talked. So I think she had the article mostly written. And the headline of the article wasn't, let's talk about both sides of the truckers convoy or the complex nature of people who support the trucker convoy. It was a picture of my wife and I saying, local doctors support trucker convoy. That was the headline, And so I was kind of like, did the slap the forehead thing. And sure enough, a little while later, my wife said, what the hell did you do? I told you not to talk to her. And she basically did a hit piece on it. It felt like it felt like TMZ or something, right? Because we're kind of, no, I won't say prominent because it's too strong word, but we're known. And
you're well known for a plethora of reasons. So,
my wife basically felt like we were doxxed in a way because there has been a really nasty, horrible, and even in some cases, a threatening backlash against people who are supporting the trucker convoy. So all of a sudden, they put us front page of the paper with our picture saying they've supported the trucker convoy. And so it was like, man, you can always depend on the mainstream media to sink to deeper and deeper lows in their attempt to stay relevant. Get clicks.
I don't know that there's, you said you meet a lot of good people in your work. I'm like, I had kind of that same experience, going into the law enforcement world, over 13 years ago now, with a mindset of dealing with the worst of the worst when you're working on that corrections end, and coming out of it having met some people that were genuinely just in a low spot in their life and needed help and were really ready to tackle life from a perspective of personal responsibility, and then still others who just didn't care. And I tell you what, I would much rather deal with those individuals in those situations than trust 98% of the people who are part of the mainstream media. And I've had one positive experience in the last 2 years, one positive experience with somebody from mainstream media. And that was at after a school board meeting where I was aiding a parents group that's trying to speak out. And she actually did a really balanced job, just a very balanced piece. And she sought me out afterwards to ask me why I was involved and reported accurately. And I reached out to her publisher, who I met through other things in the past, and told her, I says, your reporter did a phenomenal job. But that's one that I met in the last 2 years that hasn't just been hook, line, and sinker for everything that the authoritarians are throwing at us. So I can relate to how you feel.
I agree. And what's interesting for me, if I hadn't have gone into medicine, one of the other things I've always been interested in, I might have been a journalist, but it's interesting. I was reading kind of a paper that looked at, about 10% of the population is really woke, maybe a little less. It seems like more because they're so loud, but it's only about that. A lot of the population is kind of neutral, and a whole lot of us are kind of like, come on. But when you look at who goes into journalism, modern journalism, and what they teach, journalism schools are both the most woke part of the university, and the universities are really woke. And so basically, almost 100% of mainstream journalists come from that 10% of society that's really woke. There's some really great exceptions. I'll put out a little plug here. There's a podcast in Canada called Trish Wood is Critical. So Trish Wood is a former mainstream journalist who left it about probably maybe 20 years ago now, because it was getting woke then and she couldn't stand it and she wanted to do real reporting. And she has her own podcast now. She's been the best voice in Canada on the whole COVID situation. She's interviewed some of the big alternative voices and really done some great stuff on it. And that's my hope, is that we, in a way, I'll give you a kind of a gross example, but I don't know if you ever like really stub your toe bad and you get the big black toenail and then it eventually falls off. But what happens is a new toenail grows in underneath and eventually the old one will loosen up and fall off. And I see mainstream media as the black toenail. And I see
it's on its way out. It is.
It's dying. Yeah. But I see podcasting and these alternative news sources as growing in underneath, and it's already there and it's ready to take over. So it's not like when these old crusty papers and TV channels are dying. It's not like there's nothing there to replace them. Now there are some problems with the new media in that it can get really, it's potentially more polarized because people on the left can pick their left-wing sources, people on the right can pick the right-wing sources, whatever.
Oh, absolutely.
But
it's a difference between watching the Young Turks and Steven Crowder.
Right. That's right. But if you look at the numbers in general, like, again, Rogan's a great example. I think Rogan is great because he's not even a right winger. He's just a centrist. No, if anything, he leans a little bit to the left. Yeah, he's a Bernie bro, right? Like he's a Bernie bro. Not anymore. No, not anymore. But that's where he came from, and he's not a right wing guy or left wing guy, and he's not playing gotcha journalism. He doesn't have somebody in like the what was it, Kathy Newman interview with Jordan Peterson? Was it Newman in Britain? Was that the gal in England? Yes, yeah. Oh, she was there to burn him. Yeah, right. So what you're saying is, she picked the wrong guy. Right. Well, and Joe Rogan is on the opposite end of the reporter spectrum, or reporter or journalist, or whatever you want to call him. He just talks to people. I actually watched, before it got removed, a few years ago, I watched an interview he did with Alex Jones. It was really interesting because he asked him some good questions, but he wasn't there to pin him down and get him to say what he wanted so he could say, aha, gotcha. He was just there to let Alex Jones talk. And what I came up with out of that was, Alex Jones is pretty freaking crazy, and I don't believe most of what he says. I do think there's a few things he says which are actually sensible, and there's some of these conspiracy theories have grains of truth in them, but he's a nutty guy and he's self-promoting and whatnot. And Rogan just let him hoist himself on his own petard, as they say, right? He wasn't there to force him to say something. He's there to let him talk. And that is what I love, and I think we need more of, this long form conversations. Right?
Oh yeah, that's everybody, when I ask people to come on, I always tell them, look, I don't have a list, and went through the same thing with you. I don't have a list of 10 things I'm going to ask you, and I'm not here to kowtow to the people that I have on, but I'm also, not here to like get you in a gotcha situation. Like, one of the things I've been trying to do is get somebody who disagrees with me. nobody who's just adamantly opposed to everything that I say will come on. They'll all talk big and talk about how they could destroy me intellectually in a conversation like this, but then the minute I tell them to put their money where their mouth is and hold their feet to the fire, like, hey, I'll give you my platform to come on my show for as long as you want to come on and embarrass me on my own platform. Come make an idiot, make me look like an idiot. I'll do it. And they won't do it. They will not do it. They are not interested in it. And I don't know why, because I'm not intimidating, and I'm not as smart as 98% of the people. I got a doctor on here. I had another doctor on yesterday. I had a guy for running for governor of Minnesota on, I'm actually going to put his interview up tomorrow. I interviewed business entrepreneurs that their video just came up, and I'm like, everybody I talk to is far smarter than I am. Why not let somebody who,
You seem pretty bright to me.
I just don't have anything better to do with my time than study all these weird things that everybody else gets to study for fun. So I just want them to come on, and they won't do it. They will not do it. They won't.
I'll tell you a good story that you'll appreciate. So, and I'll be, I might as well be open about the details. So there's a few microbreweries that have popped up in my area and done really well, and one of them is called Big Spruce. And I had always been a big supporter of them because I'm a beer guy and I love the local aspect of it. Why not? I know the guy who runs it. There was a situation last year, actually 2 years ago. So in Nova Scotia, early in the pandemic, we had the worst mass shooting ever in Canada. And Americans think
that was the guy that was driving around neighborhood to neighborhood shooting people up.
Yes. Yeah. And Americans think we don't have guns. We have a lot of guns, actually. And this guy mocked up an RCMP car, so it was perfect. Yeah. He got an RCMP uniform, and then he went out. He had vendettas against people, and he went around. I think he shot 22 people, including he killed one officer. And it was a horror story for the police. I know a lot of police have great respect for the job because it's people like to criticize it from outside, and I always say try to do it for one shift and then go back and criticize again. It's tough. Anyway, this was a horrible situation for them, because you picture there's a guy driving around in a car that looks just like yours, in a uniform that just looks like yours, and he's going to shoot you if he sees you. Well, oh my God. It was the ultimate disaster scenario for these guys. And they went in, they lost one of their officers. A lot of them were really traumatized because he maimed and burned bodies, and they had to see all that. So afterwards, given all that was going on with COVID, and given that what was called the Porta Peak Massacre, there's a few of our first responders, paramedic guys, who decided to do this, come out and support First Responders Day. And we were in a partial lockdown, but you could do outdoor activities. So they were going to do this at Big Spruce. And this was all planned, and a day was planned, and posters went up and internet notices went up. And then George Floyd happened. And all of a sudden, the owner of this microbrewery, he decided that, well, it turns out that first responders are all racists. So therefore I can't do this. So he canceled it, right? And so he went from, yes, you can have your day to support first responders, to, no, you're a bunch of racists. But he wouldn't say that out. He just said, due to political circumstances, we're going to cancel it. So I know him. So I went to talk to him, because a lot of my friends, police officers, paramedics, nurses, all these frontline / first responder people, were really upset to be labeled with the racist thing, right? Because I don't think the police have shot a black person in Nova Scotia in years that I know. And so they were upset, and I went to try to talk to them, and we had this long range of conversation about various things, and I tried to kind of say, look, man. And so his response was to go around behind my back calling me a racist and trying to drive me out of the province, right? But the reason I tell this in the context of your last thing that you're talking about is I offered to him, I said, look, if you disagree with me, why don't we do a podcast? I'll do it. I'll arrange it. You come talk to me. We'll chat back and forth. You can give your opinion. I'll give mine. Then I'll put it up on YouTube. People can listen and say, hey, you know, people agree. I agree with Jeremy. He's right. Chris is a racist. These guys are all racist. Or they can agree with me. And his response was, no, I don't want to do that. Right. So
they never do. They never do.
Yeah. Yeah, he was happy to call me a racist behind my back and to trash me, but he was not happy to put his ideas out there. To me, it's like that's the ultimate weaselly thing that anybody could do in life is to say something behind somebody's back and really stand behind the vehement, but not be willing to say it publicly. I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah, I tell people all the time. Somebody just asked me, well, you wouldn't say one thing to me. I'm like, have you watched any of my videos? Like I have no problems saying things very publicly when I have something to say, and I have no reason to look at you in private and say something different than what I would say in public. And that's the thing that really kind of floors me is Canada probably has a bigger infection rate of passive aggressive reactions to things. Minnesota is known, like everybody talks about Minnesota nice. That's kind of the thing in our area. Oh, you've got Minnesota nice. I'm like, no, we're all just passive aggressive. Well, we will literally insult you in the kindest way possible in order to not ruffle any feathers. And so I think that's why Minnesotans and Canadians get along so well, because we're really just far more alike than anybody cares to admit. I think I might have mentioned to you the other day. I told somebody that I've been very impressed with watching Canada be awakened now, especially with the truckers' freedom rally and freedom protest. And I'm sitting here and I asked in the middle of all that, where's this happening in the United States? And then, of course, now all of a sudden we've got one coming starting on the 1st of March. And be watching for that, because I'm going to do some live streaming as it rolls through Minnesota. We're watching. Like, I'm watching Canadians, there's this very kind of easygoing, just get along to go along, you know, and it's not all that hard sometimes with Canada, because if you really want to go out and disappear and get away from people, you can in Canada in ways you can't in other places. If it finally say enough's enough and rise up and do something. And I said, you know, that's our little annoying brother to the north has finally had enough. And they learned that from us. The problem is we've forgotten how to do it. And that's what blows my mind, is that Canada exists. Obviously, Canada is a sovereign and separate nation, but the premise and the groundwork for Canadian independence from the crown, and I know it's some question as to whether or not that you're still, I know everybody still hails the Queen, but the groundwork for Canadian independence was laid out by the colonies, the 13 original colonies, standing up and saying enough is enough, which then really started the massive crumbling of the English Empire, which then gave birth to the rise of Canada as a separate nation.
To some degree, although, you know what, it's interesting. I again, long story, but I'll give you a really condensed version. I don't know if you know, but like, we grow up in Canada steeped in anti-Americanism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, because we weren't really constituted as it wasn't because we were fighting against the British Empire and we wanted independence and whatnot. We were clearly kind of still a colony. But what it was that the British saw that America was becoming very strong and expansionist, and they needed to kind of claim all this territory and put it together into some cohesive package so that the U.S. just couldn't come in and take it, right? We had the War of 1812, et cetera, already. And so Canada was really a reaction against what was perceived as a threat to British territory. So it was founded on we are here to fight against the US. And so we kind of grow up in Canada being taught about all the terrible things about America, like, oh, there's all these guns and they shoot each other and they're these crazy libertarians and blah, 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 blah. And I will say, like, up to my, to the time of my life where I actually started to think and read for myself, I kind of bought into that because it's just how we're brought up in school. And it wasn't until I started going to the US regularly back in 2004. We actually have a condo in North Carolina and we started to meet people down there. And one of my buddies down there, he tragically died a couple of years ago, very young, but Mitch was a Special Forces US Army guy. And one of the first
from Fort Bragg.
Well, I had, I
was stationed at Bragg, so.
Oh, okay. I had this stereotype in my mind of what a U.S. Special Ops guy from the South was like.
Big, dumb, and stupid.
Yeah, right. And that was what we were taught. And I was taught he was going to be racist and he was going to be stupid. And then I went down and I realized, okay, wait a minute. He has all these close friends who are black, and they're
incredibly intelligent.
Yeah, and he was so kind. He would give you the shirt off his back, and he'd give you a big hug. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. And he just busted my stereotype. And from there, it was just like, that was the smash my crazy mirror. And I was like, okay, wait a minute.
But we have to be forthright here in the United States, though, too, is that we tend to platform the big stupid people. Yeah. Like we do a really good job of like lambasting and lampooning ourselves. I mean, if you form most of your opinions either on what you're being taught about us in school or what we put on our televisions, men are either all sexist pigs or stupid lugs who can't function unless their wife tells them what they need to do.
Yeah, true.
That's exact. So we do a really good job of destroying the mentality of anybody being even moderately intelligent in the United States, and unless they meet a very specific guideline, especially in the media. So, Chris, I've kept you on now for over 2 hours.
Oh my God, is that long? It is. Holy.
And your hospitals, they haven't set the 911, but they might be on the cusp of it, wondering why you haven't answered. I really appreciate your time and your initial email to me and reaching out and saying you wanted to support me. For those of you who don't know, he was going to buy coffee, and I didn't know if we could even ship coffee to Canada at this rate. So can't, because coffee from the United States, especially from Minnesota, is probably racist. So,
sure. And you need to put a little label on it saying communist approved before you ship it.
Yeah. And I had told him, I'm like, I don't know if you want to buy one, Meg, because the shipping's twice the price of the coffee. So we had to work on what that would look like. And I'm thankful for the contact, because it's nice to have another ally in these thought-provoking times who comes from someplace other than the United States. And I think we always live a great risk of, should we say, finding ourselves in an echo chamber and not being able to take pushback or even engaging with someone who we agree with that might share maybe a slightly different view. And I've seen in this conversation already that you're willing to step out on a limb and go, I don't know about that. And that says a lot more about your character, and we need a lot more people like you here in the States, quite frankly. So, if it gets bad up there, you let us know. We'll bring you here. I will find a place for you.
Thanks, man. Well, if you need any kind of aging doctors with poor neuroplasticity, I'm your man.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. By the time you're done watching all of this, it's probably going to be at least 4 parts. So, because everybody that watches says stuff's too long, and I do a 14-minute video, and everybody says that's too long. So you guys are going to get like 4 sections on this. That's the best I can do. I would encourage you to check out their Substack, read it, see that you're not the only one fighting this fight, and remember that you don't get anywhere if you just sit back and don't speak out. You have to speak out. we're at that time in our culture here in the West, especially not just the United States, but in the West, especially here in the North American section of the West, we have to speak out. As Chris said, like the woke culture, the hardcore leftists are 10% maybe. We have to stop being afraid that they control things, because ultimately we're in charge. We just have to remind them of that. So until next time, Sic Semper Tyrannis.